Man ir liels prieks redzēt jūs visus šeit, antropoloģijas entuziasti un nejaušie garām gājēji, kur nesaprot, kas tur notiek. Tik un tā jūs esat vēl laipni lūgti. Mans vārds ir Klauss Edlanieks, es esmu Rīgas Tradiņu universitātes antropoloģijas programmas maģistrantūras vadītājs. Un šodien man ir liels prieks iepazīstināt jūs ar doktoru Jeppe Trolle Linnet. Un es pārslēgšos tagad uz angļu valodu un turpmāk tulkojumu latviešu valodā vairs nebūs. So it is a great pleasure for me to introduce Dr. Jeppe Trolle Linnet. He is an old friend of Riga, if I may say. An anthropologist who spent in Riga quite some time during 2000s, I think, researching young Latvian Europeans. You can ask later what he found, but later on he has spent a lot of time researching various things connected with consumption. Both working as privately as a consultant and as a university teacher. So what I hope this lecture might shed some light on is why in the world do we like places like these? And with this hope I pass the microphone to Dr. Linnet.
Okay. Thank you very much, Klaus. Yeah, it's a great pleasure that so many people have come. I realize that this is a country where people work quite late, later than they do in Denmark, since a lot of people have said that I get off at 7 when I was told that my lecture, or when I told them that my lecture would start at 7. So maybe we'll have people dropping by. It's true what Klaus just said, that I was here 14 years ago doing field work as an anthropologist. And it had a lot to do with sort of big political movements that I wanted to look at in everyday life. So this was just a few years before Latvia joined the European Union, and so it was interesting to look at young people who were working for that to happen. But like many other people, I also later turned into I wanted to get even closer to things about everyday life. Because often it's not really the big political things that matter, except in times of big change, but a lot of our lives, everyday lives, are when we live sort of beyond the. We don't have to think about survival and things like that. Then what do we think about? We think about how to have a good time, how to please ourselves. At least people do that a lot. And so going to places like this, filling up one's life with spots where one can be with other people in a way that one finds nice and in a way that one identifies with, is something that means something for quite a few people. And so this is what I have been working on. Now, of course, I have no idea who I'm talking to here, in a sense. That meaning I have no idea about your background. I don't know if you're just sitting here tonight and curious about, or if you study or do research on something related or not related to what I'm talking about. I can say that for those of you who may be into some of the academic traditions that are relevant, a lot of this builds on the tradition of phenomenology. Various philosophies and ways of thinking about how to approach everyday life and how people experience time and space and being with others. But there is also some more sort of symbolic analysis of how different things are opposed to each other. I will give a lot of examples from the place that we are. I thought that would be a way to sort of make this tangible. I'll also do a bit of the sort of more abstract concept thinking, just to show you a bit about what I find interesting to toy with in terms of concepts. And I hope you'll find it interesting and see it as an experience. So the presentation is called Counterculture Coziness. And in fact, I have been studying coziness in a Danish context. Danes have a concept for coziness called hygge, spelled Hygge. And Danes more or less think of themselves as the only people in the world who really know how to have a cozy time. And that is not necessarily true, and Danes don't really believe it either, but it's sort of a myth of the Danish nation that this is something that we're very good at. And indeed, foreigners also often think that Danes are good at that. Denmark is a small country like Latvia, and small populations are perhaps sometimes seen by foreigners as sort of interesting and not threatening and kind of cute in a sense, and a bit exotic. You sort of go to this little place and look around and interesting. And so maybe small populations and sort of that maybe have a corner of the world instead of sort of feeling that they are at the center of it. Maybe they also easily identify with things like, you know, being a bit sort of shut off from the world and having a good time with each other. But I'm not going to talk about Danish coziness. I'll be talking about a space like this and how it is seen as cozy, and why coziness and this sort of alternative feel that a place like this has, why it goes well together. Because there are cafes like this in many places. I mean, it is not something that was found a lot when I was in Riga 14 years ago. I'm sure you'll agree with me in that it is sort of, it comes with perhaps with this sort of, with certain, let's say, romantic elements of perhaps of Western consumer culture, where nostalgia and sort of a preference for sort of spaces that have sort of a bohemian and alternative and slightly worn look becomes more prevalent. That may be one thing. You can find many places in where I live, in the neighborhood of Copenhagen, which is also sort of a bit like a gentrified neighborhood. If you know what the concept gentrified means, it means that middle-class people start moving into areas that were usually relatively poor and where working-class people used to live, and where you often have small places that are not really very well modernized, and middle-class people who have relatively good incomes and high education, they love that stuff. This is exactly the authentic feel that they want. And so prices usually start to increase, and the area becomes safer, and after a decade or two you have the problem that there is not much left of what the middle class came to enjoy in the beginning, and then often gentrification then moves somewhere else. Then the newspaper starts writing about, hey, have you heard about this new neighborhood? And then everyone starts to go there. First the artists go there, and you have the young artists moving into sort of old industrial buildings, and then after that you get the hike in prices, which might also be happening right here. Some of the topics for tonight, it has to do with how places come about. It is sort of a relatively accepted notion in existential thinking that it is very important for people to feel emplaced, to have a sense of place, and to have also to not be in new places all the time, but to return to places and feel this recognition and have a sense of habit around various places in their everyday life. There is not really any possibility of sound being for a human being without having a sense of place. On the other hand, not all places are equally good at offering a sense of being. And what do people then say about a place like Chomsky? This is something that I would like to take a look at by, okay, let's see if we can find, they are here, yes. So I took a few screen dumps there it is, of some places on the internet where people talk about Chomsky bar. There, you see, one thing. What is Chomsky bar? It's a rebellious hideout that dares you to question everything. So we have the whole alternative thing. The people running here are not just doing it as a commercial operation. There are beliefs behind it, and there is also the personal element. This may not be a home or somewhere where we know everyone, but it does look a bit like your best friend's garage, and this is, of course, meant in a positive sense here. Yeah, let's just see. Sorry, there. I think I need to do like this. Preferably get out of it again somehow. Yeah. So I can go to the next one here. Which says something like this. What I noted there is the two things: beer brands that are not easily found in various mainstream bars, and then the low prices. What I'm doing here basically is finding, elements that are quite common for cozy spots, and showing you that people associate Chomsky bar with that, and doing this little ethnography is a good way of sort of finding out some of the ways that people speak about it. Here we also have somebody appreciating it because it's sort of set away slightly from the street, and also the interesting observation that not everyone finds their way into this place. Edgier local characters pass Chomsky by without even noticing. So, which sort of indicates that perhaps not everyone should enter Chomsky for people here to feel good about it. And then there is the issue that I'll be talking a bit about, the material used here. All of this is very enchanting for the author. The chipped and scarred ceiling, parts of some of the wooden planks here that separate the rooms are mentioned, and also an appreciation of the effort that the founders have done. In these 3 layers of plastic and wooden flooring were extracted, leaving the original stone and wood floor that you see beneath us. And the last one. Yeah. Here. So here we have the element of the history of the place. It used to be as I understand, it has been several things, but it has been a place where people made like glass and windows and things like that. And also, again, we're back to the wall and the floorboards. And the author says, I bet those patterns and textures have seen great and wild things. So it's a bit like the material here speaks, like almost tells a story. And then also the element which sort of goes with the cheap prices, that you can bring your own sandwich. So I did that the last time I was here. So that is a good thing. Now let's see if we get back to yeah, I think I can. Sorry, I'm not, you know how it is to be on a Mac. I think it works now. I just need, yeah, it's good now. Okay. So now we've seen some of the things that people say about Chomsky Park. So what does Chomsky have then that people say, just to sum it up? They think it has atmosphere. I'm going to talk about what atmosphere is. They think it is cozy, they think it is friendly, and they find it alternative. Okay, so the point here that I'm going to make, just to sum it up briefly, coziness and counterculture are two things that go extremely well together. And why is that? In a sense, both are about creating a distance or a sense of contrast between where you are or what you sort of believe in, and then the larger system around you. And that system can be defined through things like mass production, various sort of moral conservative conventions, and various demands that you should be productive and you should be career-oriented instead of sitting here drinking beer with your buddies. But of course we do that sometimes. In fact, we often reward ourselves for being productive by going to places like this. Then also the point is that this atmosphere is produced, it doesn't come about just by itself, it is produced through a range of means, and some of them have a very symbolic effect, but they also have a sensory effect on us, sort of directly. And they create this strong sense of contrast. So, contrast, this place is in many ways set apart from the world. Some will see it as an oasis in Riga of taste, the taste that they like, obviously. But others will come in and probably turn around in the door and think, this is not something for me. They will feel that it is, while some people will say this is the opposite of snobbish, others will probably feel that it is perhaps pretentious in some way that they don't like. It is definitely not mainstream, and some will feel that this is in itself pretentious. Some will feel that they cannot decode the strange music that comes from the loudspeakers in here. They have no idea what people are talking about, and it's clear that that being a good salesman for some big company is not necessarily the currency that brings you farthest by the bar in Chomsky, whereas being a university dropout with a great life history may actually be have higher prestige in this space. So this, like all atmospheres, this includes some people and speaks directly to their codes and preferences, while it does exclude others. And also, in case some people are thinking, hey, we never thought about all this stuff. I mean, all the stuff you're saying is not something that we have sort of meant to create. It just came about in that way. That it is not necessarily a very conscious effort when people create aesthetics and spaces. Because if one is socialized into liking stuff like this, then it can come about quite exactly, naturally, habitually, in a sense. And it means that one creates a space liked by others who shares one's preferences. Okay, so I'm going to go now in a bit further into things that constitute coziness, so constitutors of coziness, that we find at Chomsky, but we also find in many other places. For example, before I even set foot here, I was told about the guys who founded the Chomsky. I was told that they had really sort of high-paying career jobs, working for, they were bankers or something of the sort, and then they dropped out of that. Now that is, I have never met them yet. They may be in the, well, I'm told that they're traveling, so probably are not in the audience. But I'm sure that they exist, and I have no particular reason to believe that this story is made up. It can't be entirely made up, then someone would have called it out. But it is in a way a mythology, and you can see it as a kind of commercial mythology, even though it is in a way an anti-commercial mythology. Because, of course, this place is a commercial place. I mean, after all, things are sold for money here. and anyone can come in and spend money and get those things. So we're not talking, it's not a home, right? Because in homes you don't pay with money. But it is, after all, a public space, and in principle accessible for everyone who have a few euros in their pocket. Still, it is also clearly distanced in many ways to commercial principles. And this is highly effective in commercial terms. So it has the interesting paradox, which is very, very well known to consumer culture, that we have a lot of stories, a lot of advertising, a lot of that aim to create, or maybe not aim, but do create the sense that there is a distance to the market here, that there is actually a protest against the market. And I think it is very well exemplified by the story about the two founders traveling around. Already indicates that maybe they're making too much money on Chomsky. Who knows? I'm just kidding. But the point is, of course, that stories about not selling out often sell very well. We have them in all kinds of relations to artists. You know, all artists are supposed to begin their career, at least, without having commercial gain sort of as their aim, and then they can end up as geniuses, rich people, as long as that was not the original intention. So of course we can then think this is a bit cynical. I mean, so okay, so you can become successful by not aiming to be it. You can actually be commercial or create a commercial concept by aiming not to do it. Can we not escape the market? This is of course a big discussion in itself. What I will just say, as someone who has been in market studies for a while, is, and also as an anthropologist, I think it makes sense to say that we can at least not escape the fact that as human beings we always experience the world in stories and in symbols. These are the things that make art, and they also make business, especially in this sort of postmodern, very symbolically driven economy that we have of brands and stories. And I think a more relevant question than whether we can escape and whether things should be successful economically is what happens when things that originally start out as almost as a protest against something commercial. What happens when they grow, or when they become so old that they are sort of maybe sold off or left to someone? Because this is when something can become a brand. It can go. I mean, for example, there are many coffee shops that originally start out with one place, and the place is successful, and then the owner creates several places under the name of the first, and then you always start to get a little bit of feeling that okay, you know, now some of the authenticity goes away, or what we may call the singularity, the fact that there was only one unique place like this. Because what all branding in the world ever tries to do is to create replicability of the same. So we will accept that several copies of something can in a way be the same. So it turns into a brand as soon as there is more than one. And no, it's not that I think that there will be 5 Chomsky bars the next time I come to Riga. But, you know, maybe there could be one in Berlin, one in Tallinn, who knows? I mean, there are places that are so cool that that the danger in terms of creating another one may not be so great. That is also part of the whole game, of course, when people start to do this. Now remember, I'm not saying this as any sort of, I think it would be wrong. It's just interesting that we have these dynamics. Let's get back to things that create this place cozy. So there is the fact that this place used to be a functionally oriented place. It used to have a different function. This is also very, like I talked about the gentrification before. And if you move around various capitals in Europe, you'll see an enormous amount of shipyards, old factories, all kinds of stuff that have been converted into various cultural centers and things like that. It's a very, very common process. And basically, because things that have this sort of rough look, they enchant people. They also give people this sense of authenticity. Again, it's a bit like people like the feeling that they are in a place that was not made for what it is used for now. It creates a different kind of room. It creates a room with many traces, usually, of the production that went on before. And this is an interesting link between production and consumption. That things that were meant for mass production can be used for something else and be very sort of successful. Now, another thing is extremely common is that we have things like wood. Or we have other materials that are worn around us. Also old metal knobs, leather seats that are worn by customers through the years. These are fairly standard elements, you can say, of places that appear cozy. Why is that? What's so great about wood? It's apparently something people think it is warm. People call it natural. Well, it does come from nature, so fair enough. But why is wood warmer than plastic? It isn't. I mean, temperature is the same, right? It's a metaphor for wood being nicer. So it has to do, of course, with authenticity, history, or what a Swedish archaeologist who looks at theme parks, actually, if you can believe it, an archaeologist who goes to Disney World and looks at Disney World, but that's actually what he does, because he's not so much interested in the past. He's interested in how people create the perception of the past. And and Disney are incredibly good at creating sort of false expression of pastness in theme parks. One way they do that is, for example, by creating false marks that something has been placed here that was actually never placed there, but by creating sort of marks of this place being worn, you can get the feeling that there is a past. Another thing, when we move around cities, for example, the neighborhood I live in is full of posters for bands and art shows. Often these posters have layers and layers and layers. I guess you all know this thing with posters upon posters. This is also sort of this layered appearance that is almost impossible to create if you were trying to create it sort of instantly. It would be extremely complex, but it gives you this, without really thinking about it, it gives you this sense of pastness. And it can be done artificially. This is something that wood is very good at, because what does things like wood do? It is a material that allows people to leave traces. And we do not leave, it's not like we necessarily go home and we chip off a big part in the wall in order. It's not that kind of trace I'm thinking about. It's more the little microscopic trace that we're all leaving by being here. We're all dragging our feet on the floor. We're all putting our elbows on the table. And when people have been putting elbows on the table for 20 years, you can see it. So in a way, we're all co-producing this space at a sort of molecular level all the time. And in fact, adding value to it by wearing it out. Which I think is interesting. Also, this may sound banal, but we can contrast with other places, because it is not everywhere that we are able to leave traces, and not all places you can say are meant to have this small human scale. And when I say human scale, it's not to indicate that there is anything wrong with the National Library. I think it's a magnificent building, but like so many big buildings in the world, it is supposed to have a different effect. It is supposed to have it has a scale that goes far beyond the human body. And I think most architects are aware that it is difficult to make people feel good, I mean, for a long time, or at least feel relaxed and feel sort of, relaxed and down to earth and sort of in spaces where the scale is much larger than the body. There is some relationship between the scale of the space and of the human body that is necessary in order to get this feeling of pleasure. But then also the very materials like glass, steel, concrete, yes, of course they can be worn, but they don't really get the patina of wood and things like that. And we usually, it's usually not a way for people to leave traces that kind of has the same charming effect that things like wood have. Okay, other things that constitute coziness have, well, as we've seen, the prices, affordable prices. I don't think, well, it's not true that I've never heard about an expensive place that was cozy. I have indeed. But usually then that kind of coziness will be called elegance, or it will be seen as classy, and it will belong to people with a different economic capability, usually. Now, people who don't have any money like to believe that people with money cannot be cozy, because it would sort of seem convenient, right? And that if you ever became rich, you would probably lose coziness. It's almost like biblical justice, you know, like the rich shall not have coziness. That is a very common idea in egalitarian Denmark, middle class Denmark, that this is the case. So, other things, we have the micro beer brands, or often there'll be other specialties that are unique to a cozy place. And there is also I'm talking about things that have to do with the market here. Also the idea that you can bring something yourself, that you're not buying in here. Here you can bring sandwiches because they don't sell food, but other places that sell food allow you to bring your own wine and things like that. Now that of course makes it cheaper to be there, but it does not only make it cheaper, it also has a deeper symbolic effect. And records, yes, that's also a popular thing. It creates this whole mixing. When you allow people to bring some of their own stuff, you're sort of going away from the idea of this being a sort of a purely commercial business. You start mixing the informal, the personal into the commercial sphere. There is also, we saw references in the screen dumps to various things that have to do with this being friendly. So the service is called friendly, and I think it is definitely friendly, but it also looks like a friend's place. And often will also, if you hear what people think is cozy, they often like to see other people being friendly. So let's say you go to a bar that you've never visited before, but a bar a bit like this. And you can see that other guests are like on first names with the service personnel, and you can sort of deduce from that they often come here, and so the relationship is not just seller and customer between them. There is always this mixing in of the personal and the commercial. Sometimes it goes too far. We can enter places where we feel that we are hardly welcome because it's a bit like, is this a closed party or what, So there is a balance here. It like I said before, it also excludes people. Well, then there is the issue of Chomsky, who is of course a very leftist oriented person. And it's also interesting why does that, yes, I mean counterculture, but why do references to sort of leftist orientation fit with that? Now, I'm not sure how the idea of being leftist works in the political compass of Latvia, because I think in what we may still call the post-Soviet space, being leftist is perhaps historically associated with like a Soviet past, and is thus a problematic thing. But I can say that in Western Europe, at least, it has much more of a sort of anti-establishment, alternative, anti-bourgeois connotation, without being necessarily seen. It is more of a cultural world than it is seen as a strict ideology. And of course, you see it in the U.S. also. I mean, you know, rock bands and this whole sort of progressive culture often has what in U.S. terms would be a leftist orientation. If it is not leftist, then maybe we should simply call it anarchistic or anti-system or just rebellious, because then we don't have to start talking about left or right, which may not be applicable in all places. All the things that I just mentioned, beer brands, political thinking, the friendly stuff, the affordable prices, are in a way, we could say that these are ways that the counter of counterculture becomes practiced in small ways in everyday life. And they are things that create a contrast and a sense of distance. Create what we can call singularity, especially in terms of things like the beer brands, if they are unique to this place, more or less. Then we have suddenly something that cannot be bought anywhere else, and which is not mass-produced, but which is anchored in the history of the place and in the people that run the place. And as soon as you are buying something from the person who has produced it, okay, yeah, this is much better. Yeah, more cozy. Right, red is better. Yeah, maybe that was the leftist thing. Suddenly, the red lamp. Okay. Now, I mean, as soon as we have sort of the direct face-to-face link with production, then we are sort of moving out the world of mass production. I think that makes sense, probably, for you. And we have, as I said, various ways of mixing the commercial and the personal. And this we also know from bars that can be referred to as a second home for someone. We also find it in companies or other places, all kinds of workplaces, in fact, where someone likes to call this one big family. Usually that's a bad sign. It means they wanted to work a lot for free or something like that. We find this often as these references as a way to distance, whereby people will create distance to the sort of purely formal, purely contract-based world of sort of the pure market. This contrast that I'm talking about here is not just symbolic, it's also spatial. So if you think about how this space, as a physical place, is set apart from the world out there, we can see it, we can talk about this as kind of being spaces within spaces. Maybe this gets a little bit abstract here. Maybe I can make it clearer by, yeah, okay, wait a second. Okay, so a concept that I want you to think about is, imagine that this place kind of almost has an embrace on you, like a physical sort of embrace. How you get the feeling that this is an oasis or a cage that you're in, which sort of allows you to step outside the world. The Canadian anthropologist McCracken has called this effect, he calls it the embracing property, where, as he says, the surfaces of the homey environment exhibit a pattern of descending enclosure. What that means is that it is like that there are shells within shells within shells that kind of repeat the same dynamic of closing us off, in a sense, and that can feel good. It kind of feels like we're building up a shelter, that we are sort of sheltered from the world. We could also see this, we can compare with the sort of the well-known Russian dolls, which are like spaces within spaces. And if we want to compare Chomsky with this, we could say that, I mean, when you walk down the street, what do you first see? You see the fence out there, and you see the courtyard. And already there, you have a space that is set apart from the larger urban space out there. And if you like this place, you will sort of start already there to feel that you are arriving. When you step through the door, you kind of see the bar, and as you wander around, you find, if you've never been here before, you can start to discover smaller spaces inside. And also, from where I'm standing right now, especially when it gets dark, the lamps also start to have this effect of creating even more spaces within the space. And this is an effect that we often see that is necessary for this cozy vibe, is to use lamps as a way to kind of create spots where people can gather and where a social circle can sort of form and sort of feel that it is partly shut off from the other people in the space. So we are in fact right now, we are in a space that is made of many different sort of shells and spaces within each other. These spaces are both sensory, they are created by light, they are even created by smell. If you move towards the bar when they're brewing coffee, you will sort of have a sensory experience that you're moving from one zone to another. Back in the day when people were smoking in places like this, you could also have, different spaces had sort of a very different air. So there is a spatial effect just that is purely sensory, even without a materiality. Then we have the material, we have the walls, and then we even have social spaces like, I can see a group of people now, they're actually looking at me in there, but I can sort of see a circle forming, and I can, usually if I wasn't taking people's attention, they would instead be sitting in small groups, which they're probably longing to do in a little while again. And this is also something that you know from arriving in a place like this. You see groups of people sitting around, and you can say that they, you do not necessarily have access to their social circle, but they kind of, in a way, form a space between them. And if there were no people, you would often not feel as comfortable, which is interesting. The fact that the presence of other people matters for us, even if we're not interacting with them. The way that they sort of fill it up just by having their own social dynamic going. What this all leads to is that this sort of feeling that we are being sheltered temporarily, that we are set apart from the world. We know that it shouldn't last too long. We have to get home at some point. We have to go to work. But I think these places can very much be compared with a kind of shelter, of finding a temporary shelter from work and from family obligations and things like that. One concept that is good at capturing this is that this place is not a home, but it has what is called hominess, which is a bit like saying that it has some of the qualities of being at home, which we can find not only in actual homes, but also in what is called third places. Cafes have that. There is this concept of third places, which means that first places are homes and family, second places are work sites, and the third places are all the places that we sort of go to in between in order to relax and kind of find a way to socialize, and often to reward ourselves for the fact that we are that we do both the family thing and the work thing in the two other places. So okay, so. I'm coming now to the part which is a bit more conceptual. Before I finish this, just to show you some of the ideas that I'm using to analyze this. We've seen a lot of examples. I could also point to things like the fireplace is also like a very standard element of, again, of cozy places, which sort of goes well with sort of the sense that you have something that is alive and organic and has its own life in a sense, and is not connected to the larger system around you. I mean, so a fire is a very concrete thing. It gives you warmth, but it also fits within sort of the symbolic perception of sort of being anchored in one place. I like the concept of interiority. There is a New Zealand architect who has defined it in this way. Interiority is something that we can experience that has to do with containment, confinement, enclosure, even imprisonment, privacy, protection, security, shelter. So what this sort of suggests is that we have a lot of things here that are of being sheltered and being set apart that can be very positive, but they can also lead to a sense of claustrophobia, or maybe, you know, now we want to get out. I mean, many of the same dynamics are those that can also kind of imprison people. And interiority is a great concept because it not only has to do with space but also with time. So basically everything that is clearly set apart from what is around it, which also includes temporal periods like day or night, can also be referred to with this term of interiority. And this is why it's a useful concept for trying to understand an experience that is both spatial but also temporal. Because after all, we're all taking a break here when we're here. I mean, this is like we all know that we're all aware that this comes to an end and then we move on. This is sort of a precondition for enjoying an experience like this. So basically, to sum up, there is this contrast to consumer modernity of this place. There is this contrast to settings where people leave no traces, to the world of mass-produced experience, which is branded, which is repeated, and to the whole anonymity of urban space and of economic exchange. And now that we sort of have an understanding of the basic principle here, we can also look at more elements that we haven't, and see how they actually also fit in. Like little things like the fact that you can only pay in cash here, which is of course can be inconvenient, but in a way goes well with the other stuff of the rooting of this place, of the way that it is kind of disconnected and turning its back to the larger system. Also, even at the toilet, where you probably all know, if you've been there once, the prank of the door that have the many locks. I mean, why does that fit with counterculture with a place like this? Well, in a sense, it has this unsettling effect on people. Have I actually locked the door now? And you know, it also makes fun in a sense of convention just by poking this little your fear of sort of the awkward moment if someone would open the door, and sort of. So again, all these elements, they kind of add up to something. Because as we've seen, people think this place, and then we step into this joyous atmosphere, and then it kind of strikes us. And in the writings of this philosopher, the point is that it is multisensory, and it's difficult for us to defend ourselves against it, because it works on so many senses at once. That we cannot stay outside it. Also, when Christmas time comes and the whole city sort of dresses up to the ritual occasion, and you'll start to have people preparing kinds of food and selling drinks in public space that are only sold at Christmas time, and you'll start to see decorations that are only used at Christmas time. And you start to hear songs that are only played at Christmas time. You also get this super multi-sensory space, which creates, a mood that you simply cannot stay outside it. And And these are some of the things that atmosphere can do. And this is actually all these things that I have been going through in this lecture are something that we experience at once all the time while we're here. And this is kind of what sort of constitutes our experience of it. So we can, some people like to ask me, what is the one thing that makes this place work? It can be people who ask me, can you tell me what is the one thing I have to do to my restaurant, or something that will give it this feeling. But the problem is, of course, it's a lot of things together. Also, we can say that there is not really, it doesn't really start anywhere. You cannot kick it off with one thing. It kind of has to grow somehow, like layer upon layer, as I said with the posters, into being, in order to like really be effective. To be a little bit theoretical again about this, there is a very sort of hip, well, some people will probably already think that we're past it, but at least it has been quite big within the last 5, 6, 7 years, a line of thinking called non-representational theory. What that does basically is, I've been talking a lot about symbolic meaning here, sort of in this lecture. I've been talking about how, for example, let's say the thing with the locks out there, which kind of maybe can symbolize sort of an anti-conventional attitude. We can have different things that kind of have basically the whole aesthetics of the place kind of symbolize an alternative approach. Some people think that we have talked enough about symbolism and we should talk more about senses and effects. And this is what the people who like this non-representational theory are doing. What they say is that this effect of the cozy atmosphere is not only a matter of what things symbolize. It is also a matter of what things can do. We should not forget that materials are different. And so, for example, we can ask ourselves, could we build a nostalgic space with all kinds of materials? Are plastic and wood equally good at it? I've already suggested, I think, that there are reasons why wood works very well in the way that we can leave traces in it that is harder if everything was made out of glass. So some of the concepts that people use in order to understand this is that various materials have what is called a particular affordance for this effect. Like wood and metal is something that can be worn, and it will achieve what we call patina. So it's not only a matter of the meaning that we read into stuff, it's also a matter of what it can do materially. But then on the other hand, if we continue this line of thinking, the decision to, for example, have these walls here is a decision that humans have made. If they thought that it was not the right thing to do, they could have torn them down and put something else up. So the decision to treat the materials in a specific way and to use specific materials is human, and as such it is cultural. So what I would like to suggest here is kind of some dialectic, if you can see it, between what materials can do and what humans decide to do with them, that kind of move in this circular pattern in order to let spaces come about in the way that they are. And if you are into social theory, you will know perhaps the idea of the concept of structure and agency, where we could say we have all these materials and what they can do. This is sort of a structure that we deal with. But we also have an agency. Humans actively authenticate things. They actively choose to use certain materials. They also make the choice not to erase the traces left by other people, but to keep them there because they know it will have a certain effect. So this is one of the interesting things if you just want to have a brief idea of how this could be discussed at a theoretical level. It would be something about the difference between materiality and symbolic effect, for example. As a last thing, quite famous French anthropologist Marc Auger has written a book called Non-Places, and he is basically a pessimist. He thinks that we live in a hyper-modernity that is very, very alienating and full of places where we simply cannot feel human. These are non-places, like big shopping centers, architecture that is, well, he actually really does not like these big architectural prestige projects where capitals try to hire the architect that also did something nice in another capital, and yeah, it looks great, but it could be anywhere, and the scale is just really big for human beings. He also talks about things like commuting, like basically the landscape of roads, of highways, and all kinds of places where we are treated just like any other number or just as a consumer without having any personal connection. He thinks that there are far too many of those, and this is why when he sums up his book, he says real places where we can feel human offer these three things: identity, so basically things, we know what they are and they are not replicated, and we can also have our identity recognized in there because we build up personal relations. So we also have the relation, that things are related, that people relate to each other, and then also a sense of history, of rooting. And I think this place has that, and it goes very well with the countercultural feel of it. So thank you for listening. These were my 2 cents on countercultural coziness in the Chomsky bar. So, any questions or comments?
Only one thing.
Yes.
I think you can't bring and drink your own drinks because outside there's like written on the white wall, if you bring and drink your own drinks, you're a pig.
Okay, yeah.
That's only one thing.
But you can take a sandwich and a dog.
Yeah. No, I didn't mean that you can do it here, but there are other places that have a similar feel, like small restaurants, for example, that allow you to bring your own wine or beer. Is relatively common, and this also creates this sort of sense of informality and distance to the market in a sense. And so I know you can't do that here. That would be strange, since that's how they make a living. Yeah. But thank you. Yes.
Right. You do mention a lot places like Chomsky are very kind of unique and a little bit rebellious in a way, and yet at the same time, like, I can't help myself but think out. And also, you've mentioned that a lot of people think that upper class cannot feel cozy. I can't help myself but think about classic English members clubs.
Right.
Do you not think that places like Chomsky are actually, in fact, a rebellious attempt to create a copy for common people?
Well, attempt. It's hard to say what that means, right?
Well, for instance, like classic English clubs, they are meant for up-class only people. There's a rather large sums of money to be paid to be a member of such a club, which kind of also creates their distance from the rest of the public, which also at the same time makes them feel accepted and cozy and rather free because they're among
peers.
Similar peers of their own class. Isn't this just a, well, perhaps not an attempt, but isn't this just a similar thing to the opposite?
Yes, in many ways, and that's also why I emphasize that it also excludes, except for one interesting asymmetry, of course, that while we may not, sort of assuming that we're all more or less sort of part of the same class here, may not have access to the upper class groups which can have formal membership, but also maybe we simply cannot pay the bill. upper class people could actually theoretically make their way into this, and you would not have any sort of formal way, at least, of showing them that they can't enter. So it becomes a more subtle play of whether you can feel at home or not. And I think it's interesting that how you make people feel uncomfortable when they can actually enter the place. I mean the movement from upper into a place like this, and the fact that it is not happening, the cues that people are not welcome have to be different, right? They can't be as formal. I mean, as clear as if you have a club with membership, for example. I mean, there you know that you're not welcome.
What very much meant is like the way the atmosphere is being created. Both of these opposite sides, they're using exactly the very same tools and very same materials and very same system to create it. It's pretty much the only difference is that one is accessible to everyone and the other is not.
No, I definitely agree that in a club you would also find, in their clubs I'm sure you also have many secluded spaces within spaces and coziness, and you have a lot of materials and a lot of celebration of tradition and who sat there on this chair and things like that. I'm sure you have a lot of that. So yes, in that sense, absolutely. Yeah,
but we are better off here because we don't have to pay the membership.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes, good question. Any other comments or questions or reflections?
I was just wondering, actually, these last bullet points on the last slide, identity, relation, and history. I was thinking that in a sense it sums up that maybe what we feel, what this place offers is that we feel authentic in these places, right? Because I think authenticity is what we lack maybe in our daily routine, in these second places, in the jobs or somewhere else. And as you said, that the opportunity to leave the traces or to contribute or in the creation of this place, in a sense, makes us feel authentic again. Yes, that was just what I was wondering about.
Yeah. No, I mean,
that it offers the place and time to be in and to feel authentic again. In a way.
Offers us as people who come in.
Yeah, authentic as a human being.
Yes. If we sort of share the codes of the place.
Yeah,
absolutely. Which is also like, you can compare it again with the hominess and the feeling of being at home. Being at home is at one level just a very concrete. I have my home and then I'm not at home. But philosophically, it is much larger. It is a sense of being authentic, being who you are. And there are anthropologists writing about the home in Nordic culture and calling Nordic culture a very home-centered culture, where the home and family life is held in extremely high regard. Why? Because because Scandinavians or Nordic people are not, in a sense, well adapted to modernity, to sort of the formal facades that you need to put on. They simply are a bit too romantic and perhaps a bit too melancholic, but I think that may also perhaps fit relatively well with Latvians or sort of a Baltic mentality. But so basically, when you move around in urban space and you're anonymous and when you're in your professional sphere, you have to put on a certain facade. It's not that you don't do it, but you need to get home and you need to get collected again, right? And you need to be with people where you don't have to people where you can basically be yourself. They know all aspects of you, and it's a relation that is not up for negotiation whether it should continue or not. And this is, of course, something that people all over the world appreciate. But you can say that in some cultures, maybe that appreciation is emphasized a bit, because there is simply a stronger need to be authentic. Because many anthropologists have also found that there are some cultures that don't really have a strong sense of inner authenticity. Basically, some cultures have it's much easier for people to accept the idea that you are the role that you play in the situation, and your obligation in life as a human being is to take a role, for example, of a forefather or something like that, that you in a way need to continue. Maybe you also get the name of that forefather. People have many complex ways of naming children according to forefathers, and there are many sort of non-Western or primitive cultures that kind of do not really have the same idea that people have an inner self that needs to be expressed. It's much more situational how they see that. So, yeah.
Have you seen or witnessed areas which are intensely regenerated, like bringing such activities like this, which make space cozy and homey, and but don't end up with gentrification, which is then this consumer mass produced identities which take over and commercialize.
Yeah.
Have you seen like areas? Anyway, it's related to this, but
Yes, yeah, it's very.
I guess you work with that.
Yeah, it's.
And why they're not gentrified?
Why they're not gentrified?
Yeah.
I think if I can see that that when there's not money for investing in it, I mean, basically sometimes if you don't like gentrification, if you really want the raw, authenticity to stay as it is, then a lack of money in society for investing in areas can actually, in a way be seen as a good thing, because that is when harbor areas and old factory areas remain that instead of being gentrified. I cannot point to any place and say that place is not changing, but I can see even in Copenhagen where I live that when there's not the same trust in people's sort of purchase powers, then things are put on hold, and that's when some areas that have a really, really special feeling to them are allowed to stay like that for a longer time, at least. So,
but in Copenhagen, it's a policy instrument. It's a policy choice. It's not because there wouldn't be money enough to buy.
Oh, but it's still private. It's still a private venture. It's not something that the state. I mean, a private developer will maybe not make the investment right now because a lot has been built also up to the financial crisis, I cannot number the amounts of old concrete silos that used to be full of grain or something that have been turned into luxury apartments by the harbor, and it's all over the place. So I think that maybe there's enough of them right now. The market is sort of saturated, and then some areas, until maybe a new upturn comes, some areas are left as they are, which I think is a good thing. Yeah.
Interestingly enough, London Council of Hackney has had a specific department for many years who was purposely made for planning artistic areas and foreseeing where to move artists, giving them cheaper or free of charge studios to create these areas artificially, to move artists to certain areas, to develop the areas, and further to increase the property prices, and so on. Especially before the London Olympics, around the area of East End, it was very, very popular. For the last 3 years before the Olympics, you could see that literally all the warehouses and everything was literally given away for artists to create this unique space.
Right.
But even now already you can see that's all being re-commercialized and the artists are being pushed out to get to place. But the fact is such that there are specific departments within the councils and local governments working towards these ideas.
Yeah, that definitely says a lot about this process, that it is even like an official instrument.
Yeah.
Like in the 60s you send in bulldozers, now you send in the artists instead.
Would you say so, Rob? the only place I can walk in details is East London, but Princess Place, which is known as King's Road in West London, which is one of the poshest and most expensive areas in the whole world at the moment. Back in the 60s and 70s, that was a rebellious place as this, where Led Zeppelin, if I'm not mistaken, played when they were really young.
Yeah.
Right now, it's one of the most expensive places in whole Europe.
Yeah.
Camden Town experienced a similar path. Brick Lane is just about ending to experience the last bits of alternativity, and therefore it's all moving out.
Yeah. Thanks. It's a great comment. Yeah. Okay. It seems we are.
Thank you very much. Let's give.